In a split second, everything can change. One moment you're walking down a familiar street, feeling safe in your uniform, proud of your service to your country. The next moment, you're facing a nightmare that strips away not just fabric, but dignity, safety, and the very foundation of what you believed about the world around you. What happens when someone who has dedicated their life to protecting others suddenly needs protection themselves? What occurs when a person trained in the art of warfare finds themselves in a battle they never expected to fight? And most importantly, what takes place when a guardian angel appears in the most unlikely form, wielding skills that can turn predators into prey in the blink of an eye? This is not just a story about heroism. It's not simply a tale of good versus evil. This is the raw, unfiltered account of how one woman's worst moment became her most powerful testimony to the strength of human spirit and the bonds that connect us all. It's about how strangers can become saviors, how trauma can transform into triumph, and how sometimes the universe places exactly the right person in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The story you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about survival, about courage, and about the thin line that separates ordinary people from extraordinary heroes. It will take you through the darkest corners of human behavior and into the brightest examples of human excellence. Most importantly, it will show you that even in our most vulnerable moments, we are never truly alone. Prepare yourself for a journey that begins with an act of cruelty, but transforms into something much more powerful. This is the story of Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a dedicated naval officer whose life was forever altered on a Tuesday evening in downtown San Diego. This is the story of the three men who thought they could break her spirit, and this is the story of Marcus Ghost Rodriguez, a Navy SEAL whose lightning-fast intervention turned what could have been a tragedy into a testament of hope. What you're about to discover is that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear combat boots. Sometimes they appear when you least expect them and need them most. And sometimes they change not just your life, but your entire understanding of what it means to be truly protected in this world. Lieutenant Sarah Chen adjusted her naval uniform one final time as she stepped out of the administrative building at Naval Base San Diego. The Pacific breeze carried the familiar scent of salt water mixed with diesel fuel from the ships docked nearby. At 28 years old, Sarah had spent the last 6 years of her life dedicated to serving her country, working her way up from ensign to lieutenant in the Navy's intelligence division. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan when she was just 3 years old, seeking the American dream that they believed their daughter could achieve through hard work and dedication. Today had been particularly challenging. Sarah had spent the entire day reviewing classified intelligence reports about potential security threats in the Pacific region. The work was mentally exhausting, requiring her to analyze patterns, connect seemingly unrelated pieces of information, and present her findings to senior officers who would use her analysis to make critical decisions affecting national security. Despite the pressure, Sarah loved her job. She felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that her work contributed to protecting American interests and keeping her fellow service members safe. As she walked toward the main gate, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her younger sister Emma, who was studying at UC San Diego. Emma was asking if Sarah could meet her for dinner at their favorite Thai restaurant in downtown San Diego. Sarah smiled as she read the message. Emma was the only family she had left after their parents died in a car accident 3 years earlier. The two sisters had grown even closer since then, supporting each other through grief and helping each other pursue their respective dreams. Sarah quickly typed back that she would love to meet Emma for dinner. The restaurant was about a 20-minute drive from the base, and Sarah was looking forward to spending time with her sister and hearing about Emma's latest adventures in graduate school. Emma was pursuing a master's degree in marine biology, following in their father's footsteps as a scientist, while Sarah had chosen the path of military service to honor their mother's deep respect for those who protected others.
When Nell made the
drive into downtown San Diego was relatively smooth, despite the usual evening traffic. Sarah had made this journey countless times over the past few years, and she knew every shortcut and alternative route by heart. As she navigated through the familiar streets, she reflected on how much her life had changed since joining the Navy. The military had given her structure, purpose, and a sense of belonging that she had struggled to find elsewhere. It had also taught her discipline, leadership skills, and the importance of always being prepared for the unexpected. Sarah found a parking spot about 2 blocks away from the restaurant. As she locked her car and began walking down the sidewalk, she noticed how busy the downtown area was that evening. Groups of young people were heading to various bars and clubs. Couples were walking hand in hand toward restaurants, and street performers were entertaining small crowds with music and magic tricks. The energy was vibrant and positive, and Sarah felt grateful to be living in such a dynamic city. The Thai restaurant was tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on a tree-lined street that had become increasingly popular with locals and tourists alike. Sarah had discovered the place during her first month stationed in San Diego, and it had quickly become a favorite spot for her and Emma to catch up over authentic pad thai and green curry. The owners, an elderly Thai couple named Som and Chai, had become like surrogate grandparents to the two sisters, always remembering their usual orders and asking about their lives with genuine interest. As Sarah approached the restaurant, she checked her watch and realized she was about 15 minutes early. Emma was notorious for running late, a trait that had developed during their teenage years and seemed to have gotten worse since she started graduate school. Sarah decided to walk around the block to kill some time, enjoying the pleasant evening weather and the bustling atmosphere of downtown San Diego. The side streets were quieter than the main thoroughfares, lined with small boutiques, art galleries, and cozy cafes that gave the neighborhood its charm. Sarah often wondered if she would eventually settle in San Diego after her military service was complete, or if duty would call her to some other corner of the world. The Navy had already stationed her in Norfolk, Virginia, and Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and she had learned to adapt to new environments quickly, while always maintaining her commitment to excellence in her work. As she turned onto a narrower side street to complete her loop back to the restaurant, Sarah noticed that the lighting was dimmer here, and there were fewer people around. Most of the shops had already closed for the evening, and the street was lined with parked cars belonging to residents who lived in the apartments above the commercial spaces. Sarah felt completely safe in her naval uniform, which had always served as both a symbol of her commitment to service and a source of respect from civilians who recognized her dedication to protecting their freedoms.
About halfway down the block, Sarah became aware of footsteps behind her.
She initially thought nothing of it, as people were constantly walking in all directions in this busy part of the city. However, as she continued walking, she noticed that the footsteps seemed to be matching her pace and maintaining a consistent distance behind her. Sarah's military training had taught her to always be aware of her surroundings and to trust her instincts when something felt off. But she didn't want to jump to conclusions or appear paranoid. She decided to test whether her suspicions were justified by stopping to look at her phone, pretending to check for messages from Emma. As she paused under a streetlight, she could hear the footsteps behind her also stopping. Sarah's heart rate began to increase slightly, and she felt a familiar surge of adrenaline that she recognized from her combat training exercises. She tried to remain calm and think strategically about her situation. Without turning around, Sarah used the reflection in her phone screen to try to get a glimpse of who might be following her. She could make out the shapes of what appeared to be 3 men standing about 20 feet behind her, partially hidden in the shadows between 2 streetlights. They seemed to be watching her and waiting for her to continue walking. Sarah's training kicked in, and she quickly assessed her options and the potential threats she might be facing. The restaurant was still about half a block away, but Sarah knew that Emma wouldn't arrive for at least another 10 minutes. She could try to walk quickly to the restaurant and wait inside for Emma to arrive, or she could turn around and confront the men directly to determine their intentions. Her military training had taught her to avoid confrontation when possible, but also to be prepared to defend herself if necessary. Sarah decided to continue walking toward the restaurant while remaining hyper-alert to her surroundings. She kept her phone in her hand, ready to call for help if needed, and she mentally reviewed the self-defense techniques she had learned during her military training. As she walked, she could hear the footsteps behind her resume, confirming her suspicions that she was indeed being followed. The next few minutes felt like hours as Sarah tried to maintain a normal walking pace while every instinct in her body was telling her to run. She passed a few more closed shops and empty doorways, and she realized with growing concern that this particular block was more isolated than she had initially thought. The nearest open business was the restaurant she was heading toward, and there were no other pedestrians visible on this stretch of street. As Sarah approached the final stretch before reaching the restaurant, she heard the footsteps behind her suddenly quicken. Her training and instincts told her that whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen soon. She gripped her phone tighter and prepared herself mentally for whatever confrontation might be coming. Little did she know that the next few minutes would test everything she had learned about courage, survival, and the unexpected ways that help can arrive when you need it most. The streetlight ahead of her flickered intermittently, casting uncertain shadows on the sidewalk. Sarah could see the warm glow of the restaurant just ahead, but it suddenly felt impossibly far away. Behind her, she could hear whispered voices, and her military training told her that multiple attackers often used verbal coordination to synchronize their actions. Sarah's grip on her phone tightened as she prepared for whatever was about to unfold, knowing that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The attack came suddenly and without warning, Just as Sarah reached the darkest section of the street between two broken streetlights, she heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind, and before she could turn around completely, rough hands grabbed her shoulders and spun her around to face three men who had clearly been planning this encounter. The tallest of the three, a man with greasy hair and wild eyes, immediately began shouting obscenities at her while his two companions flanked her on either side. "Look at this," the leader sneered, his breath reeking of alcohol and cigarettes. "Little Miss Military thinks she's so tough in her fancy uniform." His voice was filled with contempt and something darker that made Sarah's stomach turn. The other two men laughed in a way that sent chills down her spine, and she realized immediately that this wasn't a random mugging or robbery. This was something much more sinister and personal. Sarah tried to step backward and create some distance between herself and her attackers, but she found her path blocked by one of the other men who had positioned himself directly behind her. Her military training kicked in, and she quickly assessed the situation, looking for potential escape routes and weapons she could use to defend herself. The street was still eerily quiet, and the nearest help was either back at the main thoroughfare or ahead at the restaurant, both of which seemed impossibly far away at that moment. "We don't like your kind around here," the second attacker said, his voice filled with hatred that seemed to come from somewhere deep and ugly within him. "Women have no business playing soldier, especially foreign women who think they're better than everyone else." Sarah realized with horror that this wasn't just a random crime, but a hate crime motivated by both racism and sexism. The realization that these men had specifically targeted her because of her ethnicity and her military service made the situation even more terrifying. The third attacker, who had been quiet until now, suddenly reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife with a serrated edge that glinted menacingly under the flickering streetlight. "Let's see how tough you are when we cut off those pretty ribbons and patches," he said, gesturing toward the service ribbons and insignia on Sarah's uniform that represented years of dedicated service and numerous commendations for her excellent work in naval intelligence. Sarah's training told her to remain calm and look for opportunities to escape or defend herself, but her heart was racing as she realized the gravity of her situation. These men clearly had no respect for her military service, her dedication to protecting their freedoms, or her basic humanity. They saw her as a target to be humiliated and harmed simply because of who she was and what she represented. The leader grabbed the front of Sarah's uniform jacket with both hands and yanked hard, causing several buttons to pop off and scatter across the pavement. "Let's see what's underneath all this military garbage," he said with a disgusting leer that made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. She tried to pull away from his grasp, but his grip was strong, and the other two men had moved closer to prevent her from escaping. Sarah attempted to use a defensive move she'd learned in her military training, trying to break free from the leader's grip by twisting her body and striking at his wrists. However, the man with the knife immediately stepped forward and pressed the blade against her throat, the cold metal making her freeze in place. "Don't try anything stupid, soldier girl," he hissed. "We're just getting started with you." The second attacker then grabbed a handful of Sarah's uniform shirt and began pulling at it roughly, trying to tear the fabric while making crude comments about her appearance. Sarah felt a wave of helplessness wash over her as she realized that these men were intent on not only physically harming her, but also destroying the uniform that represented everything she believed in and had worked so hard to earn the right to wear. "Please," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her terror. "I haven't done anything to you. Just let me go, and we can all walk away from this." She hoped that appealing to their humanity might somehow reach them, but their responses made it clear that they had already decided exactly what they wanted to do to her, and her pleas were only encouraging them to continue their assault. The man with the knife laughed coldly and pressed the blade slightly harder against Sarah's throat. "Oh, you've done plenty just by existing," he said. "Women like you think you can take jobs away from real Americans, think you can play dress-up in a uniform you don't deserve to wear. Well, we're going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." As the three men closed in around her, Sarah felt fabric tearing as they continued their assault on her uniform. Service ribbons that had taken years to earn were being ripped from her chest, and the patches that identified her rank and specialty were being slashed with the knife. Each cut felt like a personal violation, as if they were attacking not just her clothing, but her very identity and everything she had worked to achieve. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think of any possible way to escape or defend herself. She considered screaming for help, but the street was so quiet that she wasn't sure anyone would hear her, and she was terrified that making noise might provoke the attackers into escalating their violence even further. The knife at her throat was a constant reminder that one wrong move could result in serious injury or even death. The leader continued to tear at her uniform while making increasingly threatening statements about what he and his companions planned to do to her. Sarah realized with growing horror that this assault was far from over, and that these men had planned something much worse than simply destroying her uniform. She could see in their eyes and hear in their voices that they intended to completely humiliate and degrade her in ways that would leave lasting physical and emotional scars. As pieces of her uniform fell to the ground around her feet, Sarah felt as if everything she had worked for and believed in was being destroyed along with the fabric. The uniform wasn't just clothing to her. It was a symbol of her commitment to service, her dedication to protecting others, and her belonging to something larger than herself. Watching it being torn apart felt like watching her entire identity being attacked. The second attacker grabbed another section of her uniform and slashed at it with a second knife that he had produced from somewhere in his clothing. "Look at all these fancy decorations," he mocked, referring to the commendations and service ribbons that Sarah had earned through years of exemplary service. "Wonder what your commanding officers would think if they could see their precious little officer now." Sarah tried once more to break free, using every technique she could remember from her self-defense training, but the three men had positioned themselves strategically to prevent any escape attempts. The knife at her throat never moved, serving as a constant threat that kept her from fighting back as effectively as she might have otherwise. She realized that she was completely at their mercy, and based on their behavior so far, they had no mercy to offer. As more pieces of her uniform were torn away, Sarah felt a deep sense of violation that went far beyond the physical assault. These men were attacking everything she stood for, everything she had worked to achieve, and everything that gave her life meaning and purpose. They were trying to strip away not just her clothing, but her dignity, her sense of self-worth, and her belief in the values she had dedicated her life to defending. The attack continued for what felt like an eternity, though it had probably been only a few minutes. Sarah's uniform was now in tatters, with pieces of fabric scattered across the sidewalk like the remnants of her shattered sense of security. The three men showed no signs of stopping their assault, and Sarah began to fear that this was only the beginning of what they had planned for her. Just as Sarah was beginning to lose hope that anyone would come to her aid, she heard something that would change everything. The sound of approaching footsteps, different from those of her attackers. These footsteps were steady, purposeful, and moving quickly in their direction. The three men seemed to notice the sound at the same time, and for the first time since the attack had begun, they showed signs of uncertainty about their control of the situation. Marcus Ghost Rodriguez had been walking back to his apartment after an intense training session at the Naval Special Warfare Command facility when he heard the commotion from the side street. As a Navy SEAL with 12 years of experience in special operations, Marcus had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect trouble, even from a distance. The combination of muffled voices, the tone of aggression, and something that sounded like fabric tearing immediately triggered his combat instincts. Marcus was not a large man by most standards, standing about 5 feet 9 inches tall, with a wiry build that belied his incredible strength and lightning-fast reflexes. His olive complexion and dark hair reflected his Mexican-American heritage, and his nickname Ghost had been earned through his uncanny ability to move silently through any environment and appear where enemies least expected him. Tonight, wearing civilian clothes and a baseball cap, he looked like just another resident heading home after a long day. As Marcus approached the corner where the side street met the main thoroughfare, he could hear more clearly what was happening. The voices were male, aggressive, and filled with hatred. He could make out fragments of racist and sexist slurs, along with references to military service that immediately caught his attention. Marcus had zero tolerance for anyone who would attack a service member, regardless of branch or rank, and he felt his jaw clench as he realized what he was witnessing. Marcus paused at the corner and carefully assessed the situation before taking action. Through years of combat experience in Afghanistan and Iraq, he had learned the critical importance of understanding a tactical situation completely before engaging. He could see 3 men surrounding a woman in what appeared to be a naval uniform, and it was immediately clear that this was not a consensual encounter. The woman was being physically assaulted, her uniform was being torn, and one of the attackers was holding what appeared to be a knife.
The tactical situation was challenging.
3 attackers against 1 victim, at least 1 weapon visible, limited lighting, and civilian clothes that would prevent the attackers from immediately recognizing Marcus as military personnel. However, Marcus had faced much worse odds in combat zones around the world, and he had never hesitated to put himself at risk to protect innocent people, especially fellow service members. Marcus quickly formulated a plan based on the principles of speed, surprise, and overwhelming violence of action that had been drilled into him throughout his SEAL training. He would approach from the attacker's blind spot, neutralize the armed threat first, then systematically disable the remaining attackers before they could harm the victim or escape. The entire operation would need to be completed in a matter of seconds to be effective. Moving with the silent precision that had earned him his nickname, Marcus approached from behind the three attackers. His years of experience in urban warfare and close-quarters combat had taught him exactly how to position his feet to avoid making any sound on the pavement, and his approach was completely undetected by the men who were focused entirely on their victim. The first attacker never knew what hit him. Marcus moved with explosive speed, stepping forward and striking the knife-wielding man in a pressure point behind his ear with surgical precision. The blow was designed to immediately disorient and incapacitate without causing permanent damage, and the man dropped like a stone, his knife clattering harmlessly across the pavement as he lost consciousness before his body hit the ground. The second attacker, who had been holding the victim's uniform, began to turn toward the sound of his companion falling. But Marcus was already in motion. Using a technique he had perfected in countless combat situations, Marcus grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it in a direction that human joints were never meant to move. The attacker's scream of pain was cut short as Marcus delivered a precise strike to his solar plexus that left him gasping for air and completely unable to continue fighting. The leader of the group finally realized what was happening and released his grip on Sarah's uniform to face this new threat. He was larger than Marcus and clearly had some experience in street fighting, but he had never faced anyone with Marcus's level of training and experience. As the man swung a wild haymaker punch toward Marcus's head, the SEAL simply wasn't there anymore, having moved with fluid precision to a position where he could counterattack effectively. Marcus's response was swift and devastating. He delivered a series of precise strikes to the man's vital points, each blow calculated to disable specific muscle groups and nervous system functions without causing unnecessary permanent damage. Within 3 seconds, the leader of the attack was on his knees, unable to continue fighting and struggling to maintain consciousness as his body tried to cope with the systematic shutdown that Marcus had inflicted. The entire engagement had lasted less than 15 seconds from start to finish. 3 grown men who had moments before been terrorizing an innocent woman were now completely neutralized, lying on the pavement either unconscious or incapacitated. Marcus stood over them, breathing normally and showing no signs of the intense physical and mental effort that had just been required to end the threat they represented. Marcus immediately turned his attention to Sarah, who was standing in shock with her torn uniform hanging in tatters around her. His training had taught him that victims of violent assault often went into shock immediately after the danger had passed, and he needed to ensure that she was physically unharmed and mentally stable before taking any other action. "Ma'am, I'm Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy," he said in a calm, professional tone that was designed to reassure rather than alarm. "You're safe now. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" His voice carried the authority and competence that came from years of leading men in life-and-death situations, but it was also gentle and respectful in recognition of what Sarah had just endured. Sarah looked at Marcus with wide eyes, still processing what had just happened. One moment she had been in mortal danger from 3 attackers who seemed intent on causing her serious harm, and the next moment a stranger had appeared and single-handedly neutralized all 3 threats in a matter of seconds. She tried to speak but found that her voice wasn't working properly, a common reaction to the sudden release of adrenaline and stress hormones that had been flooding her system. Marcus could see that Sarah was in shock, but his quick assessment indicated that she didn't appear to have any serious physical injuries. The torn uniform was primarily cosmetic damage, though he recognized that the psychological impact of having her military clothing destroyed would be significant for any service member. He needed to get her away from the scene and ensure that she received appropriate care and support. "Lieutenant, I need you to focus on my voice," Marcus said, using her rank which he could determine from the insignia that remained on her torn uniform. "You've been through a traumatic experience, but you're safe now. These men cannot hurt you anymore. I need to know if you're injured, so I can provide appropriate assistance." The use of her rank seemed to help Sarah focus, and she was able to respond in a shaky voice. "I think I'm okay. They had a knife, but I don't think they cut me. They were destroying my uniform and saying terrible things, and I thought..." She trailed off as the full impact of what might have happened began to sink in. Marcus nodded understandingly. "You don't need to explain anything right now, Lieutenant. What's important is that you're safe and that we get you the help and support you need." "Do you have someone you can call? Family or friends who can come to be with you?" Sarah remembered that she was supposed to meet Emma at the restaurant, and she suddenly realized how worried her sister would be when she didn't show up. "My sister," she said. "I was supposed to meet my sister for dinner. She'll be worried when I don't arrive." Marcus helped Sarah retrieve her phone from where it had fallen during the attack and he guided her to a well-lit area near the restaurant where they could wait for help to arrive. He had already called 911 to report the assault and request police and medical assistance, and he could hear sirens approaching in the distance. As they waited, Marcus kept a protective watch over Sarah, while also ensuring that the three attackers remained incapacitated. His training had taught him that the immediate aftermath of a violent encounter could be just as dangerous as the encounter itself, and he remained alert for any signs that the situation might escalate or that additional threats might appear. The first police officers arrived within minutes, followed quickly by paramedics and additional law enforcement personnel. Marcus provided a clear, concise report of what he had witnessed and how he had intervened, while Sarah was examined by the medical team and given an opportunity to provide her own statement when she felt ready to do so. As the scene was secured and the attackers were taken into custody, Marcus realized that this encounter would have lasting effects not just on Sarah, but on himself as well. In all his years of military service, he had rarely had the opportunity to use his skills to protect a fellow service member on American soil, and the experience had reinforced his belief in the importance of always being ready to help those who needed protection. The police station was buzzing with activity as Sarah sat in a comfortable chair in the victim services office, wrapped in a warm blanket that one of the officers had provided. Emma had arrived within 30 minutes of Sarah's call, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking as she hugged her sister tightly. The two women held each other in silence for several minutes, both trying to process the magnitude of what had happened and how much worse it could have been. Detective Maria Santos, a veteran investigator with the San Diego Police Department's Hate Crimes Unit, sat across from Sarah with a notepad and a gentle expression that conveyed both professionalism and genuine compassion. Detective Santos had handled hundreds of similar cases over her 15-year career, but she never became callous to the trauma that victims experienced, especially when the attacks were motivated by hatred and prejudice. "Take all the time you need, Lieutenant Chen," Detective Santos said softly. "I know this is difficult, but your statement will be crucial in ensuring that these men face appropriate consequences for what they did to you tonight. From what I understand, you had help from another service member who witnessed the attack?" Sarah nodded, glancing toward the door where she could see Marcus speaking with other detectives in the hallway. Throughout the entire ordeal at the police station, Marcus had remained nearby, not intrusively, but close enough that Sarah could see him and feel reassured by his presence. There was something about his calm competence and obvious dedication to her welfare that helped her feel more secure in an environment that felt overwhelming and foreign. "His name is Marcus Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice becoming stronger as she talked about her rescuer. "I don't know much about him except that he's Navy, and he literally saved my life tonight. Those men were going to do terrible things to me, Detective Santos. I could see it in their eyes and hear it in their voices. If Marcus hadn't appeared when he did..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence as she contemplated what might have happened. Emma squeezed Sarah's hand reassuringly, while Detective Santos made notes. "From the preliminary reports, it appears that Mr. Rodriguez acted with remarkable restraint and precision," the detective said. "All three attackers were subdued without any permanent injuries, despite the fact that they were armed and outnumbered him. That level of controlled response suggests someone with extensive training in combat and self-defense." The detective continued gathering information about the attack, documenting the racist and sexist statements that the attackers had made, the destruction of Sarah's uniform, and the threatening behavior that had escalated to physical assault. Each detail was important for building a strong case that would hopefully result in serious criminal charges, including hate crime enhancements that could significantly increase the penalties the attackers would face. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Marcus was providing his own detailed statement to Detective Robert Kim, who specialized in cases involving military personnel. Marcus described exactly what he had observed, the tactical decisions he had made in neutralizing the threats, and his assessment of the danger that Sarah had been facing when he intervened. "You took significant personal risk in intervening," Detective Kim observed. "These men could have been armed with more than just knives, and you had no backup or support. What made you decide to get involved rather than calling for help from a safe distance?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully. "Detective, I've spent 12 years in special operations, and I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing while others are being victimized. That woman was a fellow service member being attacked specifically because of her military service and her ethnicity. There was no way I was going to walk past and let that continue when I had the skills to stop it." Detective Kim nodded approvingly. "Your military record indicates extensive combat experience and numerous commendations for valor. The department is grateful that you were in the right place at the right time tonight. Your intervention undoubtedly prevented what could have been a much more serious crime." As the interviews continued, word began to spread throughout the law enforcement community about what had happened. The attack on a naval officer, combined with the dramatic intervention by a Navy SEAL, had captured the attention of supervisors and commanders from various agencies. Several high-ranking police officials had already called to inquire about the case and offer additional resources for the investigation. Captain James Morrison, Sarah's commanding officer from Naval Base San Diego, arrived at the police station, along with a representative from the Navy's Victim Advocacy Program. Captain Morrison was a seasoned officer who had served multiple tours in the Middle East and understood both the importance of supporting his personnel during traumatic experiences and the broader implications of hate crimes targeting military members.
Lieutenant Chen, Captain Morrison said as he entered the Victim Services office, I want you to know that the entire command is behind you 100%.
What happened to you tonight was an attack not just on you personally, but on everything we represent as military professionals. We will provide you with whatever support and resources you need, both for the legal proceedings and for your personal recovery. Sarah felt a wave of relief at seeing her commanding officer and knowing that she would have institutional support as she dealt with the aftermath of the attack. The Navy had always been like a family to her, and having that family rally around her during this difficult time meant more than she could express in words. Emma had been listening quietly to the conversations around her, but she finally found her voice as she looked at Captain Morrison. My sister is one of the most dedicated people I know, she said, her voice filled with emotion. She has given everything to serve this country, and the fact that someone would attack her for that service is disgusting and heartbreaking. I hope these men face the full consequences of what they've done. Captain Morrison nodded gravely. Ma'am, I can assure you that the Navy takes attacks on our personnel very seriously, particularly when they're motivated by hatred and prejudice. We will cooperate fully with the civilian authorities, and we will also conduct our own investigation to determine if there are any security issues that need to be addressed to prevent similar incidents in the future. As the evening progressed, Marcus completed his statement and was preparing to leave when Detective Santos approached him with a request. Mr. Rodriguez, Lieutenant Chen has specifically asked if she could speak with you before you go. She wants to thank you personally for what you did tonight. Would you be willing to meet with her briefly? Marcus felt honored by Sarah's request, but he also wanted to respect her need for space and privacy as she processed what had happened. Of course, he said. I'm glad she's safe, and I hope she knows that any service member would have done the same thing if they had been in my position tonight. When Marcus entered the Victim Services office, Sarah looked up at him with eyes that were still red from crying, but also filled with a strength and determination that reminded him why he had chosen to dedicate his life to protecting others. She stood up slowly and extended her hand in a formal gesture of gratitude. Marcus, I don't have adequate words to thank you for what you did tonight, Sarah said, her voice steady despite everything she had been through. You risked your own safety to help someone you didn't even know, and you did it without hesitation. You literally saved my life, and I will never forget that as long as I live. Marcus shook her hand and looked directly into her eyes. Lieutenant, it was my honor to help a fellow service member who needed assistance. You showed incredible courage and composure during an impossible situation, and I'm proud to serve alongside someone with your strength and dedication. If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. The two of them exchanged contact information, and Marcus could see that Sarah was beginning the long process of rebuilding her sense of security and confidence after the traumatic experience. He knew from his own experiences with combat stress that recovery would take time, but he could also see in her eyes the resilience and determination that would help her overcome this challenge. As Marcus prepared to leave the police station, he reflected on the events of the evening and how quickly life could change. A few hours earlier, he had been focused on his own training and career goals. Now, he had become part of someone else's story of survival and recovery, and he realized that sometimes the most important missions were the ones that found you, rather than the ones you went looking for. The news media had already begun to pick up the story, and Marcus knew that the incident would likely receive significant public attention. He hoped that the coverage would focus on the broader issues of hate crimes and the importance of military service members feeling safe in their own communities, rather than turning him into some kind of hero figure, when he had simply done what he believed any decent person should do when witnessing injustice. 3 months after that terrifying night in downtown San Diego, Sarah stood before a packed courtroom as the 3 men who had attacked her faced sentencing for their crimes. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive, with all 3 defendants pleading guilty to multiple charges including assault, hate crimes, and destruction of military property. The overwhelming evidence, including Marcus's eyewitness testimony and the defendant's own recorded confessions, had made fighting the charges impossible. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh addressed the court with a gravity that reflected the seriousness of the crimes committed. Your Honor, this case represents more than just an assault on one individual. This was an attack on the values and principles that our military service members defend every day. Lieutenant Chen was targeted specifically because of her ethnicity and her service to our country, making this not just a personal crime, but an assault on the very foundations of our diverse democracy. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with victim advocates and military counselors to find her voice and her strength after the trauma she had endured. She had initially been reluctant to make a victim impact statement, preferring to let the legal process take its course without having to relive the details of that night in a public forum. However, as she learned more about the broader implications of her case, she realized that speaking out could help other victims and potentially prevent similar attacks. When Judge Patricia Hernandez called for victim impact statements, Sarah rose from her seat with confidence that would have been impossible for her to imagine just 3 months earlier. She had written and rewritten her statement dozens of times, wanting to strike the right balance between expressing the impact of the crime while also demonstrating that she had not been broken by the experience. Your Honor, Sarah began, her voice clear and strong. 3 months ago, 3 men tried to destroy more than just my uniform. They tried to destroy my sense of safety, my pride in my military service, and my faith in the basic decency of my fellow Americans. They targeted me because I am Asian American and because I serve in the United States Navy, as if either of those things made me less deserving of respect and protection. Sarah paused, looking directly at the 3 defendants who sat with their heads down, unable or unwilling to meet her gaze. What they didn't understand is that military service teaches you that setbacks and challenges are opportunities to become stronger. The uniform they destroyed has been replaced, but more importantly, my commitment to serving my country has only grown stronger as a result of their actions. She continued, her voice gaining power as she spoke. These men assumed that attacking my uniform would somehow diminish my military service or my right to wear it with pride. They were wrong. Every ribbon, every patch, every symbol on my uniform represents not just my individual achievements, but the collective sacrifice and dedication of all who have served before me, and all who will serve after me. Their assault on my uniform was an assault on that legacy, and I refused to let their hatred triumph over that honor. The courtroom was completely silent as Sarah delivered the most powerful part of her statement. I want to thank Marcus Rodriguez, the Navy SEAL who intervened that night and showed these defendants what real courage and strength look like. His actions remind us that there are good people in this world who will stand up for what's right, even when it puts them at personal risk. His intervention saved me from what could have been much worse consequences, but more importantly, it restored my faith in the power of human decency to overcome human cruelty. Marcus, who was sitting in the gallery with Emma and other supporters, felt a profound sense of respect for Sarah's courage in speaking so eloquently about such a traumatic experience. He had watched her transformation over the past 3 months, from a victim struggling with shock and fear into a powerful advocate for justice and healing, and he was proud to have played a small role in her journey. Judge Hernandez listened intently to Sarah's statement before addressing the defendants directly. The crimes you committed that night were motivated by hatred and prejudice. That has no place in our society. Lieutenant Chen represents the best of American values: service to others, dedication to protecting our freedoms, and the strength that comes from our nation's diversity. Your attack on her was an attack on all of those values. The sentences were severe, reflecting both the seriousness of the crimes and the hate crime enhancements that had been applied. The leader of the attack received 8 years in state prison, while his 2 accomplices each received 5 years. All 3 men were also ordered to pay restitution for the damage to Sarah's uniform and to complete extensive community service and cultural sensitivity training upon their eventual release. Following the sentencing hearing, Sarah and Marcus met for coffee at the same Thai restaurant where Sarah had been planning to meet Emma on the night of the attack. The restaurant owners, Som and Chai, had followed the case closely and had become even more protective of Sarah, often checking on her when she came in and making sure she felt safe and welcome in their establishment.
"I've been thinking about that night a lot," Sarah told Marcus as they sat at a quiet table in the back of the restaurant.
Obviously, it was the worst experience of my life, but it also taught me things about myself and about human nature that I might never have learned otherwise. I discovered that I'm stronger than I knew, and I also discovered that there are people in this world who will risk everything to help a stranger in need. Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. I've been thinking about it too. In all my years in special operations, I've been trained to neutralize threats and protect innocent people. But I've always done that in military contexts with clear rules of engagement and support structures. That night reminded me that the skills we learn in service to our country can also be used to serve our communities and protect our fellow citizens. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma, who had become friends with Marcus during the legal proceedings and had asked to join them for their post-trial meeting. Emma had been profoundly affected by the attack on her sister, but she had also been inspired by the strength and resilience that Sarah had shown during her recovery. "I have something I want to share with both of you," Emma said as she sat down at their table. "The attack on Sarah made me realize how much I've taken for granted about safety and security in our society. I've been volunteering with a victims' rights organization, and I want to go back to school to become a counselor specializing in trauma recovery. Sarah's experience taught me that I want to help other people find their strength after terrible things happen to them." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her sister's hand. "Emma, that's wonderful. I know how much your support has meant to me during this whole process, and I can't think of anyone who would be better at helping other people heal and recover from traumatic experiences." Marcus smiled at both sisters. "It sounds like something positive is coming out of something terrible, which is often how the best changes happen. Sarah, you've become an advocate for military service members who face discrimination and violence. Emma, you're going to help other victims find their strength and resilience. That's a pretty powerful legacy to come from such a dark experience." As they sat together in the restaurant, the three of them reflected on how much their lives had changed since that night in downtown San Diego. Sarah had returned to her duties in naval intelligence with a new sense of purpose and a determination to speak out about hate crimes targeting military personnel. Marcus had begun working with military victim advocacy groups to train other service members in intervention techniques and situational awareness. The story of Sarah's attack and rescue had received significant media attention, and both Sarah and Marcus had been invited to speak at military installations and community events about hate crime prevention and the importance of standing up for others. They had also worked together to develop training materials that could help military personnel recognize and respond to bias-motivated attacks on their fellow service members. 6 months after the attack, Sarah received notification that she had been selected for promotion to lieutenant commander, a recognition not just of her excellent performance in her intelligence duties, but also of her advocacy work and her courage in speaking out about her experience. The promotion ceremony was held at Naval Base San Diego, with Marcus, Emma, and dozens of other supporters in attendance. As Sarah stood at attention while Captain Morrison pinned her new rank insignia on her uniform, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The same type of uniform that had been torn and destroyed in hatred was now bearing the symbols of her continued advancement and success. The ribbons and patches that her attackers had tried to take away from her had been replaced and joined by new decorations recognizing her service and her advocacy work. In her promotion speech, Sarah addressed the assembled military personnel and guests with a message that had grown out of her experience and her recovery. "The uniform we wear represents more than just our individual service," she said. "It represents the collective commitment of all who have chosen to dedicate their lives to protecting others. When someone attacks one of us because of what our uniform represents, they attack all of us and all the values we defend," she continued. "But our strength comes not just from our individual courage, but from our willingness to support and protect each other. The person who stands beside you may one day be the person who saves your life, and you may one day be called upon to do the same for them. That bond of mutual protection and support is what makes us stronger than any force that would try to divide us through hatred and prejudice." As the ceremony concluded, Sarah looked out at the faces of her fellow service members and felt a deep sense of pride and purpose that had only grown stronger since the night she had been attacked. The men who had tried to break her spirit had instead forged it into something more powerful than they could have imagined. Her journey from victim to survivor to advocate had shown her that even the worst experiences could become the foundation for positive change and meaningful service to others. Marcus, watching from the audience, felt proud of the role he had played in Sarah's story, but even more proud of the strength and resilience she had shown in transforming her trauma into a force for good. Their chance encounter that night in downtown San Diego had created a bond of friendship and mutual respect that would last for the rest of their military careers and beyond. The story of that night would continue to inspire others long after Sarah and Marcus had moved on to new assignments and new challenges. It became a reminder that heroism often comes in unexpected forms, that evil can be overcome by courage and quick action, and that the bonds between those who serve their country extend far beyond rank, branch of service, or personal background. Most importantly, it demonstrated that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone, and that help can arrive from the most unexpected sources when we need it most.